A casserole on the table. A corpse in the study. Only one ingredient is murder. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? Your comments light up this mystery-loving community. Now, let's begin. It started with a phone call that smelled faintly of desperation and nutmeg. I was 2 minutes into a quiet afternoon, in the front room of the brownstone, with a mug of coffee in one hand, and the girl in the iron corset in the other, when the phone rang. I let it go to the second ring so Fritz could grab it from the kitchen extension. He didn't. Ring 3 and it was my turn. Ring 4 and I had the receiver in my hand. Nero Wolfe's residence. Archie Goodwin speaking, the voice. On the other end didn't ask for Wolfe or even for me. It said, "Is it true your boss won't leave the house for anything less than an act of God or an act of Congress?" That kind of opener is usually followed by either a hang-up or a check. "That depends," I said. "Are you offering one of the above or just asking for a friend?" A pause, then, "My name is Meredith Colby. I have a situation. It's strange. I've been advised to contact your office. A friend of mine said Mr. Wolfe occasionally takes unconventional cases." I need to define unconventional, Miss Colby. We've dealt with everything from murder in a teacup to blackmail in Morse code. Another pause. "It's about a casserole." I put down the dime store novel. "Lady, you're not calling to complain that it was under-seasoned. It was poisoned," she said flatly, "and someone meant for it to kill me. By the time I convinced Wolfe to take the meeting, it was 5:22 p.m. on a Wednesday, which was as good as trying to tap dance through his orchids with muddy boots. The only reason he didn't growl me out of the room was that I pitched it with the right combination of menace and culinary intrigue. "She claims she was almost murdered by casserole," I said from the office doorway, "and I get the impression it wasn't a simple nut allergy. She thinks someone deliberately laced it." Wolfe didn't move a millimeter in his throne behind the desk. His eyes were closed. His lips were barely touching. The only indication he was still alive came from the slow rise and fall of his chest beneath that yellow silk robe. I could hear the distant clink of Fritz in the kitchen. A casserole case was still technically food-adjacent, which meant this was closer to home than usual. "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "Yeah, that's what I said, but she's on her way over." His eyes opened. "You invited her here?" "I didn't. Say you were taking the case. I just said we'd listen. If she's lying, you can toss her out with your usual tact." But she sounded rattled. "And if someone really did try to serve her a hot dish with a side of arsenic, it might be worth at least 10 minutes of your sitting time." Wolfe sighed, closed his eyes again, and said, 10 minutes. Meredith Colby arrived at 6 on the dot, wearing a coat that cost more than my suit and heels that suggested her idea of danger was more Madison Avenue than Mean Streets. She had honey-blonde hair set in a loose chignon and a scent that suggested either lilies or a very expensive marketing decision. She introduced herself with a soft handshake and a nervous glance at Wolfe, who hadn't stood, obviously, and who nodded once curtly before motioning her to the red chair. "I've asked Mr. Goodwin to summarize your call," Wolfe said. "You claim someone tried to poison you in a casserole." She nodded, folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Last Sunday, I was hosting our monthly recipe club. I made a seafood gratin. We each cook a dish and vote on the best one. Harmless. Fun. Only this time I took 2 bites and had a violent reaction. Rash, nausea, dizziness, I passed out. "An allergy," I offered. "No, I've had every allergy test known to man. I'm clean. The doctor says it was chemical and specific." "Specific how?" She hesitated. "The hospital toxicologist says it was a compound called sodium fluoroacetate, rat poison." That got Wolfe's attention. His eyes opened fully. "You're certain?" "Yes. And it wasn't in the dish I made. I tasted it when I prepped it earlier that afternoon. It was fine. I also served it to the other women, 5 of them. None of them got sick." That's odd, I said. Unless you think someone laced your portion. I do. Someone tampered. With it between plating and serving. Or, God help me, knew exactly where I'd sit and doctored that serving in advance. Wolfe drummed his fingers on the desk once. You should have gone to the police. I did. They said they couldn't prove anything. No witnesses, no trace on the other portions, and no camera footage, just my word. They treated it like some attention grab. Said I'd watched too much Dateline. Have you? I asked. She gave me a look. Mr. Goodwin. Someone tried to kill me. My club isn't exactly a den of criminals, but one of those women wanted me dead. I don't know why and I don't know how, but I want to find out and I want your help. Wolfe didn't respond. His gaze drifted toward the ceiling. I knew the signs. Gears turning, assumptions churning, motives marinating. After a long pause, he said, Name them. Sorry. The 5 women. Your club. Names. Oh, right. Well, Teresa Forbes, Gillian Darnell, Candice Lung, Melissa Trent, and Grace Ellery. We've been meeting once a month for almost 3 years, Wolfe grunted. And you trust them? I thought I did. That's a sentiment unworthy of you, Miss Colby. Who leads the club? I do. It was my idea. Any recent conflict? She bit her lip. I had a falling out with Gillian. She accused me of lifting a recipe. Silly, I know, but she got very personal. It ruined the last meeting. Personal how? She said, I manipulate people. That I use the club for social climbing. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. That is not silly, Miss Colby. That is human nature. You believe one of these women attempted to kill you in such a manner that your death would appear natural. You claim opportunity but lack proof. That's why I'm here. Indeed, there was a silence that could have aged wine. Then Wolfe shifted slightly. I will consider the matter. Consider. That is all. She left 20 minutes. Later, with less assurance than she came in with. I escorted her out, gave her a card, and promised we'd be in touch if Wolfe made up his mind before Christmas. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was leaning back in his chair, staring at the ceiling that I sat. So? He didn't answer. Come on, you're already interested. I can see it on your eyebrows. Still nothing. Then finally, there is something deeply offensive, he said, about corrupting food to such an end. Poison, deceit, and vanity in a single casserole. Yes, Archie, we shall pursue it. I grinned. Thought you'd bite. He gave me a look that could curdle milk. Have Fritz prepare sole meunière for dinner. I find myself in need of reassurance. Meredith Colby had barely made it down the steps when Wolfe called out my name, sharp and sudden. I pivoted halfway back from the hallway and stuck my head in. Yes, sir. Have Miss Colby send the full names and contact information of the 5 women immediately. I want dossiers. You will speak to Lon Cohen and Saul Panzer tonight. I nodded. That meant the machinery was officially in motion. When Wolfe asks for dossiers before dinner, it's not curiosity, it's engagement. By the time Fritz laid out, the Soul and a chilled bottle of white burgundy, I'd phoned Lon at the Gazette for any background on our cast of culinary comrades and sent Saul a note asking him to start digging quietly. I also sent Meredith a polite nudge by text and got a reply within 5 minutes. The woman might have been the target, but she wasn't playing victim. She was fast, focused, and maybe a little too eager. She attached a scanned document with full names, home addresses, and LinkedIn links for all 5 suspects. You could say what you wanted about socialites, but Meredith was clearly operating with a side of spreadsheets. At 9:20 that night, while Wolfe was settling in with Plutarch's, lives a tome as thick as his waistline, Saul called back. Got a quick profile on 3 so far, he said. Gillian Darnell's the loud one. Finance background, married twice, divorced twice. A real social shark by reputation. There's a string of petty lawsuits around her. Neighbors, old friends, even a dog walker. Likes to win. Charming, I muttered. Keep going. Grace Ellery works at the Metropolitan Museum. Curator's assistant, mid-30s. Her social trail's quiet, almost surgical. She doesn't like to post much. But she used to work PR for a restaurant group. And guess whose name keeps popping up in those early press releases? Meredith? Ding ding. So, possible history. More than possible. Could be friendly, could be frayed. I'll keep digging. The other two are softer hits. Melissa Trent's a yoga instructor with a food blog, and a very public affair with a married chef 2 years ago, and Candice Leung is a real estate broker with no major flags yet, but I'll give it another 24. I thanked him and hung up. By now I had the feeling that our little recipe club might not be as vanilla as Meredith had painted it. The next morning, after breakfast and orchid time, during which I am forbidden, under pain of exile, to disturb Wolfe unless the brownstone is on fire or someone's holding me at gunpoint, I started laying the groundwork. That meant calling each of the 5 ladies, introducing myself with the right balance of politeness and plausible deniability, and inviting them individually to what I referred to as a quiet inquiry into a private concern. That's Wolfese for, someone tried to kill your friend and we're looking into it. Not one of them seemed surprised to hear Meredith's name. That said something. Gillian Darnell answered with a clipped voice and an audible eye roll. Of course, Meredith's making this into a thing, isn't she? I told her to let it go. We're all grown women. I think the hospital visit was staged. I think Meredith likes attention, and if this is about last month's recipe tiff, you can tell Mr. Wolfe she's blowing smoke. Grace Ellery was cooler, polite, reserved. I'm happy to speak. With you, she said. But I'll need to check with my supervisor. I don't usually engage in private legal matters without notice. It's not legal, I said. Not yet. She gave a little pause at that. Then I suppose we can talk. Would tomorrow afternoon work? Candice Leung was nervous and spoke in a half-whisper, like someone who didn't want to be overheard, possibly by herself. I don't think I should get involved, she said, but you were there. I was, and I wish I hadn't been. The whole thing, it's complicated, which, translated from nervous civilian to investigator's ear, meant there's something I know that I'm afraid to say out loud. I marked her for a personal visit. Melissa Trent was the last to pick up. Her voice was sugar and silk, a little too smooth for first thing in the morning. Oh, is this about the poison casserole? She said, laughing. I blinked. You sound remarkably chill about almost dying. None of us ate it, except Meredith. And look, she's alive, and milking it. I don't know what kind of angle she's playing, but I'd rather not be dragged into her next Vogue essay on survivorship. That made it official. All 5 had things to say, but not one of them sounded innocent in that golden retriever way. Even the calm ones were calculating. I compiled everything for Wolfe by 11, and by 11:15 he was back in his chair, stewing over the data like a pot of Fritz's consommé. Your impressions, he said. None of them are choir. Girls. Gillian's got knives in her smile. Grace has history with Meredith, but it's buried. Candice is scared stiff of something. Melissa laughs too hard. And Meredith herself, well, she came to us, but she might be steering more than she's letting. On, he nodded. Indeed, who served the casserole? Fritz. No, confound it, at the luncheon. I glanced down. According to Meredith, they serve buffet style. The dishes go on the counter and each person plates her own. Wolfe grunted. Which means the poisoned portion could only have been tampered with in 2 scenarios. Prior to arrival, if Meredith brought it altered. Or after plating, if someone introduced the toxin selectively to her plate. She claims she tasted it before plating. Said it was fine. Yes, that's what she claims. Archie, I want to see that dish. You mean the actual serving? Dish? Of course, there may be remnants or scent or even trace. I hesitated. I'll ask, but she might think it's odd. She already thinks someone tried to kill her with it. Let her find that stranger than our interest in evidence. He closed his eyes again. And Archie, see her kitchen, if she'll allow it. Observe her cooking habits, cleanliness, who has access, and see if the women rotate hosting. That last point struck something. If they do rotate, then this may have been premeditated by a party who anticipated her turn, which suggested planning, malice, not an accident or impulse. As I grabbed my coat, Wolfe added, "And one more thing. Collect the recipe." I turned. "The casserole?" "Yes." "The exact one. Instructions, ingredients, process. Every step. You think the clue's in the gratin?" "No," he said, folding his hands. "I think the clue is in the cook." With that, I headed out to meet Meredith Colby again, this time on her turf. And this time, I had more than a polite interest in her culinary process. I had a list, and if there's one thing you learn working for Wolfe, it's this: the longer the list, the closer the truth. Meredith Colby's apartment was on the Upper East Side, one of those polished mid-rise buildings with a uniformed doorman, soft lobby music, and the unmistakable scent of money being kept comfortable. The elevator let me out on the 10th floor, where her unit was the corner with south-facing windows and a faint citrus vanilla waft that didn't quite mask the tension underneath. She opened the door dressed like someone prepared for scrutiny. Sleek navy slacks, pale blouse, no jewelry except for a modest gold watch. Not much makeup. That struck me as deliberate. When you're trying to look like you've got nothing to hide, you don't show up looking like a magazine ad. "Mr. Goodwin, please come in." I stepped inside. The place was neat, modern, and not overdone. Open-plan living room, books artfully stacked on a glass console, tasteful black and white prints. It looked like a lifestyle blog designed it. "I assume this isn't a social call," she said, leading me into the kitchen. "Would you like coffee?" "I'd kill for one. But no poison, please." She gave a tight smile. "Dark roast one. Sugar?" "Black, no sugar. I've got enough of that in my line of work." She busied herself at the counter. I took the moment to scan the room. The kitchen was a showpiece. Quartz counters, sleek European appliances, a magnetic knife strip lined like a surgical tray. But it wasn't just for display. You could tell it got used. The burners had faint rings of wear, and the cutting boards bore the subtle scars of repeated prep. I noted 3 spice racks, alphabetized, and a laminated conversion chart taped discreetly inside a cabinet door. "You're thorough," I said. "Cooking is the only place in my life where I control all the variables." She handed me the coffee, strong, no nonsense, like her. "I'd like to see the casserole dish," I said. Without protest, she moved to the lower cabinet, pulled out a heavy white ceramic baker with ridged handles. She placed it on the counter and stepped back. I washed it, obviously. But it's the one I used. I didn't think to preserve it like evidence. I leaned in. The dish smelled faintly of seafood and bechamel, nothing unusual. I turned it over, checked for cracks, chips, or foreign residue. Nothing obvious. But Wolfe hadn't asked for it expecting to find fingerprints. He wanted context, and context in this case looked pretty ordinary. "You said you tasted the gratin before." "The event?" "I did. I always do. I sampled a spoonful after it came out of the oven just to check the seasoning. It was fine." "And you didn't notice anything off in the portion you served yourself at the gathering?" I took a small helping. Halfway through eating, I noticed a strange bitterness. Then the heat. I thought it might be just an overcooked edge until the room started spinning. Were the others already eating by then? They'd just started. And nobody else got sick? She shook her head. No. That's what's so terrifying. If it had been in the dish, they'd all have tasted it. I'm sure of that, I nodded. You hosted here, right? Yes. Anyone arrive early? She hesitated. Candace came 15 minutes before the others. She said she wanted to help set up. I didn't think anything of it. Did she go into the kitchen alone at any point? I don't, she paused. Yes, briefly. I was in the hallway answering a call. She was setting out the drinks. I think she brought out a wine opener from the drawer over there. She pointed. Her fingers were steady, but her voice had just the faintest hitch now. And afterward, we all served ourselves buffet style as usual. I took mine last. I thought it polite as hostess. I took another slow look around the kitchen, the wine rack, the drawers, the counter, everything tidy, organized, neutral. But a 10-minute window alone in here with the dish on the counter. That was time enough to swap a portion or doctor a serving spoon. Especially if you had a reason. Let's talk about Gillian Darnell, I said, still not facing her. Of course, you had a fight with her? Yes. Serious? She looked off to the side. She accused me of plagiarism, said I'd stolen a recipe she posted online 5 years ago. It wasn't true. But it escalated. She embarrassed me in front of the others, said I was a climber, a fraud. I laughed it off, but afterward she sent me a message telling me to watch my step. Still have it? She opened her phone, scrolled, and handed it over. There it was, a terse little text that said, "Funny how some people think they can cheat their way to the top. Careful, Meredith, karma bites." Not exactly a death threat, I said, but not a love letter either. She reclaimed the phone. I don't think she'd really do anything. Gillian's all bark. Sometimes bark's a cover for bite. I turned back to her. The recipe, do you have it written out? Yes, I submit them every month to the club's shared folder. I can email it. Please do. She walked to her laptop and tapped keys. I watched her posture. No fidgeting, no nervous flutter. She wasn't someone easily rattled. But that didn't make her innocent. It just made her practiced. I finished the coffee and set the cup down. Gently, one last thing, I said. The club rotates hosting? Yes, I hosted this time. Candace is next, then Grace. That was something. The order was set. Predictable. Anyone looking to plan a little gastronomic sabotage would know in advance when the target would be handling food, or when she'd be vulnerable. I might need to speak to them again. In person. She nodded. Do you think one of them did it? I think someone thought you were worth silencing. I left her apartment with a copy of the emailed recipe, a mental note to call Saul again, and a gut feeling that the casserole wasn't just a medium. It was a message. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore. I waited. When he finally emerged, he sat, wiped his brow and reached for his beer. Well, I summarized, the kitchen, the hosting order, the 10-minute window, the wine opener excuse, the text from Gillian, Meredith's composure, the clean dish, the digitized recipe. He listened in silence. When I was done, he tapped his fingers together. Send the recipe to Fritz, he said. Ask for his commentary, preparation, temperature, timing, whether any ingredient could obscure bitterness. I raised a brow. You think the poison might have been in the original dish after all? No. But I want to know whether it could have been masked. If so, the culprit may have trusted the taste test to fail, he paused. Also, Archie, yes? Contact Mr. Panzer. I want him to follow Miss Darnell, discreetly, and Candace Leung. There is something off about both. And Meredith. She is either the victim, Wolfe said, lifting the beer with great solemnity, or the playwright, perhaps both. He took a sip and closed his eyes. Outside, the light was beginning to thin. I went to make the calls. It wasn't yet dinner, but the scent from the kitchen told me Fritz was prepping something with cream, garlic, and intent. It struck me, not for the first time, how Wolfe could unravel men with logic and women with silence. And this case, cooked in poison, served with civility, was already beginning to smell like something rotten hiding in a recipe. The next morning began with the quiet urgency that tends to drift through the brownstone when Wolfe has begun to care, grudgingly but irrevocably. Fritz had received the emailed recipe, a seafood gratin layered with shrimp, scallops, gruyere, and a mustard shallot cream base. As instructed, he recreated it to spec, right down to the broil time. I was treated to a mid-morning whiff of butter and white wine from the kitchen, and by 11 Wolfe was seated at his desk with a modest portion steaming in a porcelain bowl. He didn't eat it. He never does during a case. Instead, he brought it close to his nose, sniffed, tapped the edge of the gratin with a fork, and dictated to me like Caesar sending orders from a marble balcony. Acceptable structure. The crust is evenly browned. No offensive odors. The mustard could potentially obscure a faint bitterness, though not thoroughly. Fritz, your impression? From the sideboard, Fritz stood tall, arms folded. The base is delicate, but yes, mustard and scallop can blunt. Sharper notes if subtle. A clever hand could conceal a touch of something unpleasant. Wolfe nodded once. Enough. Dispose of it. Fritz complied, whisking the dish away like it had just insulted the orchids. Wolfe turned to me. Report from Saul, he called. 10 minutes ago. Said Gillian's been meeting someone at the Bowery Hotel twice this week. A man, same guy both times. Tall, slick suit, hair like lacquer. Saul snapped a few shots. Said they were careful, but it looked like a negotiation. And Candace? Nothing flashy. She took a meeting at her brokerage Tuesday afternoon, and yesterday she spent an hour at a pharmacy on East 78th, then drove home. Saul noted she paid in cash and left with a small unmarked bag. No receipt. Wolfe made a face. Unusual, but not conclusive. I agree. Though it's the kind of cautious that doesn't belong to someone with nothing. To hide. He tapped his fingers. Invite Miss Colby back this evening. I want her here when I speak to the others. You mean all 5? No, not yet. First, Miss Trent and Miss Ellery. I want to observe their demeanor. Separately. I raised a brow. You think Grace and Melissa are likely? I think they're the least visible. That disturbs me. Arrange them for tonight. 7 and 8. Inform them Wolfe wishes to ask a few quiet questions regarding their impressions of the luncheon. And Meredith? She may listen, but not speak. It was the kind of setup Wolfe preferred. Peel back the layers while the suspects were still comfortable. Before they started building their defenses, by 6:45 the office was aired, the beer was chilled, and Fritz had placed a discreet tray of olives, spiced nuts, and crackers on the sideboard. Wolfe would not eat them, of course. They were for effect. I'd argued that the poisoned casserole angle made snacks a little inappropriate, but he insisted. Wolfe believes in atmosphere. At 6:58, Grace Ellery arrived. She was prompt, calm, and dressed in a tailored dove-grey pantsuit with a silver pin at the collar. Her eyes were steady behind thin-rimmed glasses. No nerves, but also no flair, just control. Wolfe gestured her to the red chair. Miss Ellery, thank you for coming. Of course, I'll admit I was surprised by the request. You were present at a social gathering where a woman was nearly killed. Yes, I was. You did not express concern when contacted. She adjusted her glasses. I'm concerned, but I'm also cautious. Meredith has a tendency to dramatize. I wasn't sure if this was a police matter or a performance. Do you believe she poisoned herself? A flicker. Small, but there. No. I don't believe she's capable of that kind of self-harm. But you do believe she might exaggerate the aftermath? I think Meredith has made her image her currency. If there's a way to profit from victimhood, she'll find it. Did she have enemies? Grace gave a faint shrug. People resent her. That's different. Wolfe leaned forward half an inch. You worked together once? Her eyes shifted to me, then back to Wolfe. Briefly, I handled PR for a restaurant group that hired her for branding consultation. And we didn't end well. She had a way of absorbing credit and deflecting blame. Eventually, I left the company. Did you blame her? I was disappointed. But no, I moved on. Did you have access to the kitchen during the gathering? She blinked. We all did. It was casual, but no, I never handled the food. Wolfe held her gaze a moment longer, then gave a small nod. That will be all. She left politely with a handshake, and I showed her out. As I returned, Wolfe said, She's reserved, polished, but not disingenuous. If she poisoned Meredith, it was an act of desperation, not habit. I poured him another inch of beer. You think she's in the clear? No, but I think she knows something she hasn't processed yet. Watch her if we gather them all. At 8:03, Melissa Trent arrived. She was all perfume and patter, blonde waves, pale pink blouse, glossy smile. I offered her water, and she asked, if we had cucumber slices. Wolfe didn't even blink. Miss Trent, he said, do you believe Meredith Colby was poisoned? She tilted her head. I think Meredith believes she was. That's not an answer. She had a reaction. Sure, but the rest of us were fine. You served yourself. Third after Grace, before Gillian. And where was Meredith's plate? She plated last, said she wanted us to eat while it was warm. And the dish, was it disturbed? No, it stayed on the counter. The whole time. Wolfe nodded slowly. Tell me, who dislikes Meredith most? Gillian, she said instantly. But that's not new. They've been circling each other for months. And Candace? She's nervous around all of us. But she's sweet, not dangerous. What about you, Miss Trent? Me? I don't have time to hate people. I barely have time to cook. And yet you maintain a public blog with weekly updates, regular partnerships, and a recipe book deal in the works. She blinked. You did your research. My assistant did. I rarely bother unless compelled. A silence fell. Then Wolfe said, thank you, that is all. Melissa looked surprised. That's it? That is all for now. She stood, gave a faint, amused curtsy, and left in a soft swirl of fragrance. When I returned from the front door, Meredith was seated quietly on the yellow couch, legs crossed, arms folded, her eyes locked on Wolfe. Well? I asked. She is shallow, Wolfe said, but not stupid. She thinks Meredith is faking, and if she is, Miss Trent would gladly let her drown in her own performance. But poison? No. She lacks the temperament. You're narrowing the field. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached for his beer, stared into the foam, and murmured, Candace remains central. She was early, she was alone, she was quiet. And scared. Yes. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, Archie, bring her in. You want her here? With Meredith? No. Alone. Miss Colby may remain in observation, but she will not speak. I nodded. And after Candace? Wolfe opened his eyes again, sharp now. After Candace, he said, we summon them all. The next morning found Wolfe even more silent than usual, which is saying something. When I came into the office with a steaming mug of coffee and a file of notes from Saul's latest tailing sessions, he barely acknowledged me. He sat motionless, his fingertips pressed together under his chin, staring not at the orchids or his books, but at the center of his desk, like he was waiting for it to confess. I left him to it. By 10, I had confirmed with Candace Leung that she could come in for a brief conversation about last weekend's incident. She was hesitant, of course, her voice tight, uncertain, like someone half hoping I'd cancel. I didn't. Wolfe wanted her in at noon, which meant the window, for Nerves was closing. At 11:58, Fritz opened the front door. She stepped inside like a woman entering a confessional. A pale yellow blouse, soft cardigan, no makeup. Her eyes were wide and uncertain, No jewelry, no perfume, no armor. I offered her a seat in the red chair and took mine to the side. Wolfe sat forward slightly, not so much in welcome as in readiness. "Miss Leung," he said without preamble, "you were the only guest to arrive early to the luncheon?" Yes, I wanted to help. Meredith's kitchen is beautiful. She always lets me do the wine, why not the food," she blinked. "She's particular. She doesn't let anyone touch the actual dishes." "You were alone in the kitchen for several minutes, correct?" Her voice dropped. "Only a few. I got the corkscrew. I opened the Chardonnay." "You handled utensils." She hesitated. "Just the drawer. I didn't touch the food. The gratin was cooling on the stove. I didn't go near it." Wolfe leaned back. "Miss Leung, do you believe Meredith Colby was poisoned?" Yes, I think she was." "You believe someone tried to kill her?" She twisted her fingers together. I think someone tried to scare her. Maybe not kill, just send a message." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "A rather severe message." She shook her head. "I know how it sounds, but you don't know what it's like in that group. They all act friendly, but there's this tension underneath. Meredith's always in control, always getting the attention. Even when she's quiet, the room bends around her. And that disturbs you?" "No," she said quickly, then softer. "Not me. But Gillian resents her. And Melissa, she acts like she doesn't care. But she copies Meredith's recipes. And adds saffron to pretend it's hers." "Who do you suspect?" She blinked rapidly. "I don't know. I don't want to think any of them would go that far. But someone did." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Wolfe sat forward. "Miss Leung, did you see anyone tamper with the food?" "No." "Did you notice anything unusual?" Another pause. Her lips parted. There was a spoon. A spoon. "When I came back to the kitchen, after opening the wine, I saw a spoon on the counter, not one of Meredith's. It was metal, not ceramic. It wasn't there before. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe she just added it." "You didn't tell the police?" "I didn't think it mattered." I wasn't. "Sure." Wolfe looked at me. I gave him a nod. That was new. He returned to her. "Could you describe the spoon?" "Just ordinary, maybe restaurant style, long handle, flat end." "And you touched it?" "No, I left it alone. I felt strange just being near it." "That will be all," Wolfe said. She started to rise. "Miss Leung," he added, "if it was you, now would be the time." Her face drained. "It wasn't." He nodded. "Thank you." I escorted her out. When I returned, Wolfe was still looking at the empty chair. "Well?" I said. "She's scared and she saw something, but she didn't place it in context. Not until now. She's not the type to poison someone." "No, but she's the type to be used." That gave me pause. "Used?" He glanced at me. "Think, Archie. If the dish was tampered with, subtly, precisely, it was by someone who had access, and if that person knew Meredith plated last, then they could have prepped a specific portion. Indeed. And the spoon. A delivery mechanism. Possibly coated, possibly meant for that final scoop. Which would explain why Meredith tasted it earlier with no effect, and why she was the only one who reacted." He stood, slowly. "He only does that when something has clicked." "Call them," he said. "All 5 tomorrow evening here." I stared. "All of them at once?" "Yes, and tell Saul to be present in the front room. You think it's about to break? I know it." He sat again and reached for his beer. "Archie." "Yes?" "Fritz. We'll prepare a small seafood course tomorrow. Enough to remind them of what they tasted, without, of course, the lethal seasoning. Won't that be a bit provocative?" I sincerely hope so. The next morning I made the calls. All 5 women agreed to attend, though I could feel the tone shift. Meredith sounded braced. Gillian was dry and impatient. Grace was cool, cautious. Melissa gave a light, performative chuckle. And Candace didn't say much at all. That evening, At precisely 6:55, they began arriving. Fritz had set the office with quiet precision. Soft lighting, clean glasses, no food in sight. Saul arrived 20 minutes early and took position in the front room with the Times and a concealed notepad. Wolfe wore a dark blue suit with a rust-colored tie and sat with his hands folded, a silent monolith of judgment. When all 5 women were seated, Meredith on the couch, the others arrayed across chairs like contestants in a polite firing line, Wolfe finally spoke. "You are here," he said, "because something unforgivable occurred among you. One of you attempted to poison Meredith Colby. Whether you intended her death or merely her fear is irrelevant. The act was vile." A silence spread. Then Gillian scoffed. "This is absurd." Wolfe's gaze didn't move. "Miss Darnell, you threatened her, publicly and privately. I insulted her. I didn't feed her poison. You sent her a warning. You called her a fraud. Did you also deliver a message through a tampered spoon?" Gillian bristled. "I don't even know what that means." Wolfe turned to Candace. "You saw it." Candace froze. Yes, I didn't know." "You did not know what it meant. That is acceptable. What is not acceptable is silence." Meredith leaned forward. "She didn't do it, Nero." "I don't believe she—" Wolfe raised a hand. "Silence, Miss Colby." She sat back. He turned now to Melissa. "You blogged about the gathering. You implied Meredith's reaction was exaggerated. I didn't say it outright. But you suggested it. Why? Because I don't like being dragged into melodrama. Poison is not melodrama." Another silence. Then Wolfe spoke again. Slower. The spoon was the key. Introduced after the dish was plated. Left behind, not carelessly, but as a symbol. A message. His eyes locked on Grace. "And you recognized it." Grace didn't move. "You worked in restaurant PR. You know silverware. You know brands." A flat-handled metal spoon etched at the base. "From one of your former clients, I presume." Still nothing. Meredith looked at her. "Grace?" Wolfe's voice was soft now. "You knew. You saw it. You didn't say anything, because it meant something only you would understand, and it was meant for you." Grace slowly turned her eyes toward him. "No," she said. "It wasn't for me." "Then for whom?" Her jaw tensed. "For Meredith." Wolfe nodded once. "And you know who left it?" Grace's silence was the answer. Wolfe leaned back. "I will give you one night. Tomorrow I reveal what I already know." He closed his eyes. "That is all." The room emptied with the kind of tension that clings to your clothes. No one said much. Gillian left first, heels sharp on the floor, jaw tight enough to crack glass. Melissa trailed after, making a faint comment about needing a drink, while Candace offered a nearly inaudible good night and slipped out without looking at anyone. Grace was the last of the suspects to go, except she didn't really go. Not right away. She lingered just outside the threshold of the office as if expecting Wolfe to call her back. He didn't. He merely raised one eyebrow at me, and I nodded, silently dismissing her. She left. The door closed with a whisper. Then there was Meredith. She hadn't spoken again after Wolfe told her to be quiet, but she'd watched every moment like a hawk with a migraine. Now, as I shut the door behind the last of the 5, she turned from the couch and walked slowly back toward Wolfe. "You know something," she said. Wolfe, eyes still closed, said nothing. "You know who it was. You said as much." Still nothing. She exhaled. "If you think I'm going to wait here like a schoolgirl for the answer, you will," Wolfe said, eyes opening. "Because you came to me, and because you want the truth, even if you think you don't." She opened her mouth, closed. It then turned and walked out without another word. When I came back from locking the front door, Wolfe was rubbing his temple, an act which for him is the equivalent of full-body exasperation. "Well," I said, settling into the red chair. "They're rattled. Grace most of all." "She has a conscience," Wolfe said quietly. "An inconvenient one, I suspect." "And you really do know who it was?" He didn't look at me. "It is not difficult, Archie. All the pieces are there." "Then spell it." He didn't, not yet. Instead, he gestured toward the tray Fritz had set on the desk, a simple collection of utensils, each carefully arranged. "Do you see that spoon?" he asked. I looked. "Middle slot. Standard restaurant-style metal, flat handle, slight wear along the edge." "Yeah, it's from Halberds." That caught me. Halberds was one of those polished midtown restaurants with a celebrity chef, a wait list that required connections, and a price tag that discouraged casual diners. But more importantly, it had also been the site of a PR scandal 2 years ago, a mishandled food poisoning incident that forced a quiet settlement, a chef's quiet firing, and, if I remembered right, some management turnover. Wolfe went on. "Grace, Ellery handled the damage control on that account. Quietly, efficiently. One of the few crises that didn't stain her reputation." "Okay, so?" "She recognized the spoon not as evidence of tampering, but as a signature." I frowned. "You're saying the spoon was a calling card? Not of the poisoner," Wolfe said, his eyes cold now. "Of the intended message." Something clicked. And it wasn't pleasant. "You mean someone planted that spoon not to kill Meredith, but to frame someone else?" "Precisely." "Then Grace wasn't the target." "No," Wolfe said, voice now low and taut. "Meredith was." It took a moment for the shift to land. "You're saying the poisoning was real, but the clue, the spoon, was misdirection." "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that the only person who would recognize a Halberd spoon and link it to Grace Ellery is someone who once worked with her, who shared that moment, and knew how she'd interpret it." "Meredith." He nodded. "Once. She brought us a mystery, but she brought us one that looked away from her, and she has been composing her performance since." I sat back. "But why would she poison herself? That's a hell of a play just to land a dramatic exit." "She didn't plan to fall ill," Wolfe said. "That was the error." My eyebrows went up. "You think someone else tampered with the dish? For real?" "I think she expected to control the situation. A planted spoon, a fabricated panic, a campaign of subtle accusation. But someone else had an idea of their own." "Grace?" "No, Miss Leung." I stared. "She came early. She had access. She found the spoon and assumed it meant something, something only Grace would understand. But she didn't realize Meredith had already intended that spoon to be her own tool, and she didn't realize that swapping her own message into Meredith's portion would spiral into a genuine medical emergency. You're telling me this was a double cross. I am telling you it was a convergence. Meredith staged a setup. Candace used it to send her own warning. Grace recognized a ghost, and the only reason Meredith lived was because she ate less than expected." I stood and paced to the window. It was dark now, the trees on 35th casting shadow branches across the brick. "So who do we call first?" "No one," Wolfe said. "We call all." "You're going to do it tomorrow?" "Yes, at 4 o'clock Saul will remain present. You'll name names. I will name the guilty, and reveal the one who nearly outplayed them all." Shook my head. "You think they'll show?" "They will. People do not like unfinished narratives. And Meredith most of all, wants to be seen." He closed his eyes. I went to call Saul, then turned back. "One more thing," I said. "If you're wrong—" "I am not." "No," I said. "You're not. But if you are, what's the backup plan?" He opened one eye. "You, Archie." I laughed. "I hope you mean emotionally." He did not reply. He rarely jokes when murder or its moral equivalent is involved. I went to call Fritz next, to prep tomorrow's setup. I didn't know how Wolfe would close it, but I knew this much. Someone was walking into the brownstone tomorrow thinking they'd buried the truth in a casserole, and Wolfe was about to carve out every last secret. By 3:45 the next afternoon, the brownstone was braced like a warship waiting for impact. Fritz had arranged the chairs in Wolfe's office with a symmetry that would have passed military inspection. The coffee table had been cleared of everything but a stack of linen napkins and a discreet glass pitcher of water, neutral, unpoisoned, and politely menacing in its minimalism. Wolfe sat like a marble bust come to life, composed, upright and utterly unreadable. Saul waited in the front room with a newspaper folded in his lap and a concealed recorder in his coat pocket. As arranged, I had just finished double-checking the lock on the front door when the buzzer rang. It was Melissa, first again. Her tone was light, but her expression was sharp when I opened the door. "Here we go again," she said with a tight smile. "Am I supposed to bring a side dish this time?" "No need," I told her. "This one's catered." Grace arrived next, understated and careful, her eyes scanning the room like she was checking for new damage. Then Gillian, in a dark green pantsuit and a look that could burn toast. She didn't greet anyone. Candace came forth, hands clenched together, cardigan sleeves stretched down to her wrists like armor. Meredith was last, of course. She wore black, tailored, dramatic, restrained, morning couture for a crisis that hadn't claimed a body. I showed them in one by one. Wolfe didn't stand naturally. He nodded once to the group as they sat. No one spoke. Even Melissa, who never missed an opening, kept quiet. Wolfe let the silence grow thick, like soup left too long on the stove. When he finally spoke, it was, with the gravity of a judge handing down a sentence. "You are here," he said, "because one of you committed a crime. That crime was not murder, though it easily could have been. It was deceit, calculated and cruel, and it was followed by a cascade of cowardice." Eyes flicked around the room. Gillian shifted in her seat. Meredith's chin lifted a hair. "I will speak plainly," Wolfe continued. "Miss Colby was poisoned. That is a fact. The evidence, medical, chemical, and circumstantial, is sufficient. What is also true is that she was not the intended victim of that specific act." Now the silence changed quality. It sharpened. "The dish was tampered with by Miss Leung," Wolfe said, turning his head slowly. "She introduced a compound, sodium fluoroacetate, into a single portion of the casserole. She did so not with the intention to kill, but to make Miss Colby ill, severely ill. As a warning." Candace's face went white. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Wolfe went on. "Miss Leung, you were aware that Meredith had arranged a symbolic gesture, a planted spoon from a former client's restaurant, meant to be seen and interpreted as a threat by Miss Ellery. You found the spoon by accident. You misread its purpose." "And you added your own," Candace finally spoke, her voice papery. "I didn't mean it wasn't supposed to go that far. I thought she just wanted to embarrass Grace, make her sweat. I thought she'd eat it, feel dizzy, go to the hospital, just enough to scare her." Gillian let out a sharp breath. Melissa muttered something I didn't catch. Meredith didn't flinch. "But why?" Wolfe asked. Candace stared at the floor. "Because she makes us feel like furniture. She smiles and nods, but she's always above us. Controlling, perfect. I wanted her to feel out of control, just once, just enough." She glanced up, eyes glistening. "I didn't know she already had a plan." "No," Wolfe said. "You didn't, and that is where the knife turned in your own hand." He shifted now toward Meredith. "You, Miss Colby, staged the incident. Not the poisoning, but everything else. You invited these women knowing full well what tensions simmered between them. You planted a recognizable spoon meant to point toward Miss Ellery, assuming she'd react. You expected the hospital visit to come from a mild allergic reaction or from a staged episode you could control. What you did not anticipate was being genuinely poisoned. Meredith's jaw flexed, but she said nothing. Wolfe went on. You weaponized suspicion. You built a stage, arranged the cast, and trusted that your reputation as victim would hold while the others turned on one another. And when the real poison was introduced, you let it play into your narrative. You came to me, not in fear, but in ambition. At last she spoke. And what would I gain, Mr. Wolfe? You are a consultant, a strategist, a woman whose success is rooted in perception. The sympathetic figure, wronged and noble, rises in the public eye. You saw the opportunity to transform a petty squabble into a rebirth. The tarnished genius, unfairly accused, nearly lost, emerges with a best-selling memoir and a new platform. Her laugh was soft and bitter. You make it sound theatrical. You made it theatrical, Wolfe replied coldly. Gillian spoke, now voice low. I knew something was off, but I didn't think it was all that. And yet, Wolfe said, you told no one. None of you did. Miss Ellery, you recognized the spoon. You understood its implication, but you said nothing. Grace looked down. I didn't want to start a war. You were already in one, Wolfe said. Melissa snorted. So what happens now? You report Candace? You blacklist Meredith? Or do we all just go home and pretend none of this happened? Wolfe leaned back, his hands folding across his stomach. I have no legal authority. What I offer is truth. What happens next is not my concern, but I expect Miss Colby will be retiring from the Recipe Club, and Miss Lung will be answering. Questions for the police. Candace said nothing. Just a single nod. Meredith rose. She was still composed, but the edge had dulled. Her performance had ended, and she knew it. She looked at Wolfe with something like respect, and something else that might have been relief. You're right, she said. You're right about all of it, except one thing. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. I never intended to write a memoir. He didn't respond. She turned and walked out. The others followed, quiet, stunned. Gillian was muttering. Melissa kept glancing back like she'd missed a beat. Grace looked like she might cry, but didn't. When the door finally closed, I exhaled. Well, I said, that was cheerful. Wolfe didn't reply. He just reached for the beer Fritz had set beside him and took a long sip. You going to tell the police? I will inform Inspector Kramer. He may do as he pleases. And you. Wolfe closed his eyes. I shall have veal for dinner, and afterward a brandy. The world is full of poison, Archie. One must fortify accordingly, I smiled. I'll drink to that. The next morning broke quiet over the brownstone, the kind of grey, reluctant dawn New York reserves for the day after something significant. Wolfe didn't stir from his room until nearly 11, which wasn't late by his standards, but I got the impression he was in no rush to re-engage with the world. Not because the case had left loose threads, there were none as far as he was concerned, but because peeling back a human soul, especially one that's tried to varnish itself with self-importance and clever angles, leaves a certain residue. Fritz brought in breakfast, scrambled eggs with truffle, hot rye toast and orange juice with pulp, which Wolfe both detests and tolerates if the truffle is present, and I gave him space while he went through it. I knew that after the last drop of juice, the curtain would rise again and the world would once more be accepted into his realm of interest. When it did, I slid into the office with a fresh notebook and sat in the red chair. Kramer called, I said. Half an hour ago. Wolfe arched a brow without looking up from the Atlantic Monthly. He's not happy, I added. He said he got a call from a very rattled woman who confessed to poisoning another woman's lunch, and then broke down crying about how she ruined her entire life trying to make a point. Wolfe grunted. I also told him the poison wasn't... Meant to kill, just discredit. That didn't help. Apparently poisoning with intent to merely ruin still counts as a felony. Kramer is a literalist, Wolfe said, folding his magazine closed, but not a fool. He'll charge her with assault and offer a plea. She'll say she was emotionally manipulated. He'll roll his eyes and fine her. Meredith, I asked. That depends on her next move. She still comes out ahead, you know. She survives a brush with death, gets vindicated publicly, and walks away the misunderstood victim. Wolfe lifted his gaze. Only if she keeps quiet. The moment she tries to milk it, she'll face scrutiny. Miss Colby's success has always depended on staying half in the spotlight. This time, she may find it casts too many shadows. I nodded. It was true. Meredith had walked out of Wolfe's office the day before, not as a triumphant survivor, but as someone who'd seen her own reflection in the wrong lighting. She hasn't posted since, I said. Nothing on her social feed, no interview, no post-mortem. She will or she won't, Wolfe replied. It matters little. Her game is played. The remaining moves are echoes. It was a neat phrase, one of those Wolfe-isms that sounded heavier the more you thought about it. But I knew him well enough to see what was under it. The case hadn't ended in murder, but it had gotten under his skin in the way only non-lethal crimes of elegance could. They appealed to something colder, more cerebral in him, the idea that the worst injuries are moral. That poison doesn't always need to kill to be successful. I stood and went to the filing cabinet, slipping the folder labeled Colby Incident, already thicker than some of our murder cases, into its rightful place under C just above. Carlucci A. stolen manuscript, and Claymore T. scandal. Where do you rank this one? I asked. Wolfe didn't answer right away. It was distasteful, he said finally. Clever, but not admirable. That's your hierarchy, huh? He looked at me. Motive is the spine, method the rib cage, but admiration, yes, that resides in the brain. I'd settle for a case that didn't leave me needing mouthwash, I muttered. Wolfe sighed. You are sentimental. I'm human. An affliction. We sat in silence for a moment, the old familiar rhythm of conclusions settling in. Outside, the traffic was picking up again, the city shrugging off whatever moral reckonings it had undergone overnight. I wondered what the 5 women from the Recipe Club were doing at that exact moment. Whether Grace was back at the museum, whether Melissa had found a way to spin the whole affair into a new blog post, whether Gillian had resumed her efforts to stay relevant in whatever social battles she fought. As for Candace, she was no doubt deep in conversation with her attorney. And Meredith? Meredith was either plotting a rebrand or finally taking a hard look in the mirror. Wolfe reached for his second beer of the day. I didn't even bother pretending to be shocked. You know, I said, I think what got me was how tight the whole setup was. 1 spoon, 1 portion. 10 minutes of opportunity. It could have been murder. It almost was murder. It was worse, Wolfe said flatly. It was cowardice, done with enough detachment to look like cleverness. That is its own kind of rot. I nodded. So what's next? Lunch, he said. Anything special? Trout, with beurre blanc. And no gratin. He looked at me like I'd spat in the orchid beds. Archie. All right, all. Right. I stood and stretched. Want me to call Saul, tell him he's off the clock? Yes. And inform Mr. Cohen the matter is resolved. He need not run it. He'll hate that. He always does. I headed out to make the calls. As I passed through the front room, I saw the day's paper neatly folded on the side table. No mention of the case, of course. Wolfe would never allow that. His victories, when not required to be public, remained private, gems tucked in velvet boxes of his own making. And as I made my calls, I couldn't help but think of that casserole. A simple, innocent dish on the surface, warm, communal, but underneath, layers of envy, calculation, resentment, and fear baked into something that might have killed. Back in the office, Wolfe had dozed slightly in the warmth of the midday sun coming through the slats. Fritz would call us for lunch any moment. The city would keep turning. And the world for now would stay quiet, at least until the next spoon dropped. I'd barely hung up with Lon Cohen, who grunted his annoyance at the resolved, not for, print status of the case with all the grace of a man denied dessert, when the phone rang again. I picked it up expecting a dry follow-up from Saul or maybe Kramer, with a bark about our definition of due process. Instead, the voice that greeted me was unmistakably Meredith Colby. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, smooth but faintly frayed around, the edges like silk after a long day in the sun. "Miss Colby," I answered, leaning back in my chair. "Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I thought your dance card would be full. Interviews, appearances, maybe a return to Halberds for symbolic closure." She didn't laugh. She barely paused. "I'm calling because I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe directly. You might have missed how our little arrangement works, Miss Colby. He doesn't take calls unless you're on fire. Are you on fire?" "No," she said. "But I think I may be standing too close to something that is." That gave me pause. I covered the receiver. Wolfe looked up from his chair where he was pretending not to eavesdrop. "She says it's urgent," I told him. He gave me a grudging nod. I uncovered the phone. "Hold, please." Wolfe reached for the receiver with a slowness that made a glacier look impulsive. When he finally spoke, his voice was iron wrapped in silk. "Miss Colby." "I realize this is irregular," she said, "but I've just received a message, hand-delivered, no return name, no signature. Just a line typed out on heavy bond paper and slipped under my door." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And what did it say?" he asked. "It said, 'Next time you won't taste it first.'" There was silence, a thick, creeping kind. "Have you contacted the police?" Wolfe asked. "No." I thought it might be a bluff, but after yesterday I don't know what's real anymore. You should contact Inspector Kramer, but I didn't want this in their hands. Not yet. If it's someone from the group— "It is not," Wolfe said flatly. Another pause. "You're certain?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and I now believe I was premature in declaring the matter resolved." I leaned forward slightly. "Miss Colby," Wolfe continued, "you will bring the note here immediately. You will not share it with anyone. Else, not even your lawyer. All right, you will arrive within the hour." Click. I hung up the office extension and stood. "You think it's real?" "I think," Wolfe said, "it is real enough to suggest the game did not end when the curtain fell. We may have underestimated one of the players." Half an hour later, Meredith arrived. The black was gone. Today she wore grey, and not the dramatic kind, just a soft, practical knit that made her look less like an icon and more like a woman who had recently learned she wasn't the only one pulling strings. She handed me the envelope at the door. Plain white, heavy. No stamp, no smudges, just one line typed on a single sheet inside. Wolfe read it in silence, then passed it to me. "Next time, you won't taste it first." I exhaled slowly. "Well, that's friendly." Meredith sat in the red chair, her hands clasped tightly together. "I don't know who would have sent that," she said. "Everyone involved was there yesterday. They saw it end." Wolfe's eyes had gone glassy, focused but opaque. "No," he murmured. "They saw your story end, but someone else's has just begun." "You mean Candace?" "No," Wolfe said, more firmly now. "Miss Lung's act was impulsive, emotional. She has no taste for escalation. This," he gestured at the paper, "is strategic and patient. You think someone else was involved?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that someone wasn't finished. It wasn't like him to speculate aloud, so I knew he already had a name in mind." I waited. So did Meredith. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said finally, "you will retrieve the photographs. Mr. Panzer captured of Miss Darnell's recent meetings. I wish to re-examine them. I headed to the file cabinet and pulled the envelope. Wolfe laid the photos across his desk one by one. Gillian, unmistakable in a sharp coat and sunglasses, speaking with a tall man outside the Bowery Hotel. Same man, different day. Same hotel. Who is he? Meredith asked. We don't know yet, I said, but you're thinking he's not just a friend. He's too careful for that, I said. He stays in the background. They talk, but don't touch. He handsy. Heard something in two of the shots. Meredith leaned forward. You think she hired him? I think she partnered with him, Wolfe said, or was used by him. The doorbell rang again. I frowned. We weren't expecting anyone. I went to answer and found Gillian Darnell on the stoop, wrapped in a sleek wool coat, lipstick flawless, eyes tired. Goodwin, she said, I need a word. This is the brownstone, I told her. We do more than words, we do consequences. She gave me a look that said she'd decided to risk them. Please, she said. I let her in. She stepped into the office and stopped when she saw Meredith. Oh, she said. Perfect. Miss Darnell, Wolfe said without looking up, would you care to tell us what you delivered to your companion outside the Bowery Hotel? Her lips parted. You've been watching me. Of course, Wolfe said. You have the temperament of a person who begins with insult and ends with injury. And you loathed Miss Colby more than you let on. She sat in the chair opposite Meredith without being invited. I didn't poison her, she said. I didn't send that note either. Then what were you doing? She exhaled. Trying to buy silence. That got our attention. Wolfe opened. His eyes, whose? Gillian looked at Meredith. Yours. Meredith's brow furrowed. Mine? Yes, because you knew, before anyone else, about my ex-husband, about the money. You found out through one of your corporate contacts. You were going to leak it, I knew you would. Meredith was staring now, blinking like the math wasn't adding up fast enough. I planted the spoon, Gillian said. I wanted Grace to think you were framing her. I wanted her scared, I wanted you tangled, I wanted distance. You planted the spoon, Wolfe repeated. Yes. And yet you claim you did not send the note. I didn't, she said, almost pleading now. I'd already played my hand. That note, if it's real, came from someone else. Silence again, then Wolfe said, Archie, you will find Mr. Panzer, and you will find the man in the photographs. I nodded, grabbing my coat. Because, Wolfe said, I believe this is not the end of a grudge. It is the beginning of a scheme. And for the first time in days I saw something rare in Wolfe's expression, not certainty, concern. By the time I made it out the door and into the soft churn of late-afternoon Manhattan, the wind had turned. Still no snow, but cold enough to make me regret leaving my scarf on the coat rack. Saul answered on the second ring, which was early for him unless he was already working a lead. I figured you'd call, he said, without even waiting for me to say hello. You saw the guy with Gillian again? Wolfe's seen enough. To want a name, fast. I got one, Jack Tyrrell, former corporate asset recovery. Now a fixer for hire with just enough discretion to stay off official radars. He's done work for private firms, grey zone stuff, NDAs, non-compete muscle, the occasional untraceable handoff. Not violent, but slippery. Slippery how? He doesn't leave prints. No paper trail. Uses burner phones. And he's careful. Last time I tailed him, he made me 2 blocks before he doubled back and hopped a taxi off 5th. That wasn't ideal. If Tyrrell had caught Saul's tail, he was sharper than your average shadow. And if he was mixed up with Gillian Darnell, I had to assume he was being paid to clean something. Maybe a reputation, maybe a loose end. Where is he now? Vanished. Last confirmed sighting was yesterday morning at a cafe in Tribeca. Had coffee with a woman who wasn't Gillian. No pictures. Her face was blocked. That's convenient. That's Tyrrell. I thanked him and hung up. Back. At the brownstone, Wolfe was unmoving. But the tension in the room had shifted like a dropped note in a symphony. Gillian hadn't left yet. She sat quietly in the corner of the office, like someone trying to decide whether to confess or commit arson. "He has a name," I said, dropping into my chair. "Jack Tyrrell, corporate disposal specialist with a talent for making things go. Away without noise." Wolfe nodded slowly. "And he met someone new yesterday. Possibly another client, possibly another phase." Wolfe turned to Gillian. "Miss Darnell, did you inform Mr. Tyrrell that your attempt to manipulate the narrative had failed?" She blinked, slow and brittle. "No." "Did you imply Meredith was still a problem?" I said she wasn't going quietly." "Did you mention the meeting at my office, the revelations?" She hesitated. "Only that it had gotten complicated." Wolfe grunted. "Then you gave him a reason to act." Meredith shifted in her seat now, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "Are you saying I'm still a target?" Wolfe's voice was as flat as the knife edge of reason. "I am saying that if Tyrrell was hired to manage a threat, and that threat has now multiplied, he may escalate. Especially if he interprets the initial failure as yours, or worse, if he believes you're no longer controllable." Gillian made a sound in her throat. Not quite a gasp, not quite a denial, something in between. "I didn't tell him to hurt her," she said. "You didn't have to," Wolfe replied. "Men like Tyrrell don't wait for permission when they think initiative is an asset." I stood and walked to the window. A delivery truck was idling across the street, steam curling from its undercarriage. I scanned faces, corners, shadows. Too many people, too many places to vanish. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, you will call Inspector Kramer, ask him to assign a detail to Miss Colby's residence, and to have Tyrrell picked up for questioning. Do not mince words. Say he is implicated in an attempted poisoning and a written threat. I thought you hated giving Kramer ammunition. I hate losing to amateurs more. I made the call." Kramer grunted a lot, told me if this turned out to be another domestic pissing contest with a thesaurus, he'd have my head, and then agreed to send a car to Meredith's building immediately. He promised to put out a quiet bolo on Tyrrell. "Quiet," I said. "I don't want him running. If he's local, I want him boxed in." By the time I came back into the office, Gillian had finally stood up. Wolfe didn't stop her. "You'll tell them the truth?" she asked. "No," Wolfe said. "I will tell them what they need to know. You may wish to do the same." She left without another word. Meredith rose next. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said quietly. "All I wanted was to protect my name." "You failed," Wolfe said. Her lips twitched, and for a moment I thought she might say something vicious. But then she straightened her shoulders, turned, and walked out with the kind of grace that told me she'd already begun writing her version of the story. After the door closed, Wolfe reached for his beer. It was still cold. He drank half of it in one motion, then set it down with a thud. This, he said, was what I feared. That we missed someone? That we underestimated how many people had skin in the game. I moved to the tray and poured myself a small glass of brandy. "So you think Tyrrell's gone underground?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think he's waiting." "For what? For her to be alone? For a window?" "And then?" Wolfe's voice dropped. "He won't use poison. Not again. Too complicated, too traceable." I sipped the brandy, staring at the door. "You think this time he finishes it?" "I think," Wolfe said, "if Kramer does not find him within 24 hours, we will have a body on our hands." Silence settled. Fritz appeared in the doorway and glanced at Wolfe. "Dinner?" he asked gently. Wolfe shook his head. "Not yet." Fritz withdrew. I turned to Wolfe. "What's our move?" He looked at me like I'd asked whether water was wet. "You will follow Miss Colby home. Babysitting? Guarding, watching, deterring. You will remain out of sight, but close. If Mr. Tyrrell appears, you will contact Inspector Kramer and follow. I nodded. And you? I will prepare for the aftermath, one way or another. I went to the hall closet and grabbed my shoulder holster. I rarely carry, but Wolfe gave me a look of approval when I clipped it on under my coat. Then I called Meredith's building and told the doorman I'd be arriving with her shortly and to clear a space out front. When I stepped outside, the city had dimmed into its evening. Version, buses grumbling, traffic lights glowing, sirens in the distance like warnings with rhythm. Somewhere out there, Jack Tyrrell was moving. And if Wolfe was right, we had less than a day to stop him before the casserole that started, as petty vengeance became the prologue to something far deadlier. And if I found him first, I had no intention of being polite. By the time the sun cracked, the eastern skyline, I was halfway through my second black coffee and watching Meredith Colby's apartment building like a hawk with insomnia. The night had been quiet, too quiet for a city that usually offered up at least a fight or a fender bender by 2 a.m. But no Tyrrell, no unexpected visitors, just shadows stretching long and tight across pavement, as if even they didn't trust the silence. I didn't see him come in. Shall give him that. Tyrrell was the kind of guy who could walk through fog without leaving footprints. He must have come in through the service alley around back, used the freight elevator, or bribed someone. I only caught him because the doorman blinked and buzzed me after a guest, showed Meredith his ID through the glass and got waved through without a name. I was on the 6th floor landing within 2 minutes. The hallway was silent. Her door was cracked open. Not good. I slipped in, quiet, not heroically, and found him there, standing in her living room, one hand in his coat pocket, the other gesturing calmly, while Meredith stood, motionless, her back pressed to the far wall. Her eyes found mine just as I raised my voice. "Hi, Jack. Fancy meeting you here." He didn't flinch. He just turned slowly and offered a smile as dry as an old receipt. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "I was just leaving." I nodded at his pocket. "Not with that in your hand, you're not." We didn't move. Meredith didn't breathe. Then he sighed, pulled out the hand, empty, and raised both palms. "Relax. I came to deliver a warning. Just wanted to tell Miss Colby that if she kept pushing people, she'd find someone less patient than me." "I think that message came through already," I said. "Typed, neat paper, no stamp?" He smiled again. I always did admire economy. That's when Kramer's voice thundered from the hallway. "Goodwin!" They'd followed the call. I'd made the moment I spotted the crack in the door. 2 uniforms moved in, flanking Tyrrell before he could blink. His hands were already in the air, but that didn't stop them from patting him down like he was stuffed with explosives. Kramer stepped in behind them. He looked at Tyrrell, then at me, then at Meredith. "This your guy?" Meredith nodded, slowly. "He came back to make sure I wouldn't talk," Kramer grunted. "Now he'll have plenty of time to talk." As they cuffed Tyrrell and led him out, I turned to Meredith. "You okay?" She nodded, a little shakily now. The act was dropping. Or maybe the fear was finally catching up. I didn't think he'd... "I thought he was done. He thought you were done, but you made too much noise." She managed a thin smile. "I'll be quieter next time." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything I could say that wouldn't sound like a sermon or a threat, and neither seemed appropriate anymore. I called Wolfe from the hallway, gave him the summary. He listened in silence, then told me to come straight back, which I did. When I walked into the office, he was in his chair, as always, with the orchid logbook open in his lap and a beer on the desk, untouched. "She is safe?" "For now. Tyrrell's cooling off in a holding cell, and Kramer's preparing. Charges, good, sit." I did. Wolfe closed the logbook and set it aside. "This case, Archie, has been an education. I'd call it something less printable." "Poison is a crude method," he said, "but in this instance it served. as metaphor. Each woman in that circle had a motive: envy, pride, fear, and each attempted to poison the narrative in her own way. "You're getting poetic." "I am getting reflective," he corrected. The casserole was merely the stage. The performance was already in progress before Miss Colby lifted her fork. I nodded, and the encore nearly came with a body. "Count," Wolfe exhaled. "There is a cost to cleverness without restraint. Miss Colby may yet rise from this, but if she does, she will be different, less certain, perhaps wiser." "And Gillian?" "A cautionary tale." I sipped my coffee. It was finally cooling. "And Tyrell? A tool, dangerous only when pointed." We sat there a moment, the room filled with quiet and the aftertaste of too many secrets. Then Fritz stepped into the doorway. "Lunch, sir?" Wolfe nodded. As we rose, Wolfe paused, hand on the edge of the desk. "There is a line," he said, "between manipulation and malice." Meredith Colby danced on it. Candace Lung crossed it, but Jack Tyrrell, he erased it. He looked at me, one eyebrow slightly raised. "I detest poison, Archie, even metaphorical." I didn't argue. I just followed him to the dining room, where veal medallions waited on porcelain plates and a white Bordeaux breathed beside the silver. Another case closed, another soul exposed, and true to form, Wolfe didn't move a single step to do it. He never has to.